I don't know how the hell anyone can support Black Lives Matter at this point because it's clear that they're a racist, terrorist organization.
Reading every word of this set of guiding principles, Black Lives Matter completely fails to communicate to you either positively what it is they're trying to accomplish or negatively what means and what methods they refuse to employ. All those issues you got to set down in writing in the Constitution, and then they become in some ways a barrier to entry, or they set up a clear line where when someone in your organization says something that's way over the line, someone in your organization says something racist, violent, offensive, something that discredits you, you can say, hey, what they said does not represent us, does not represent what our organization is about. And if you don't believe me, just read the Constitution.
À-bas-le-ciel.
Black Lives Matter is an organization I've been asked to comment on many times for many months. I think it's been more than a year now. I lose track of time.
They hate white people, they hate cops, especially white cops, and they use fear, intimidation, and violence to push their political agenda, which is the definition of terrorism.
Look, guys, at the end of this video, I'm going to talk about my own bias. I'm going to talk about why anyone would care about what I have to say about this topic, given that I am a white Canadian Jew who's been involved mostly with the politics of Asia for most of his life, a little bit in the politics of First Nations people, Native peoples of Canada, however you want to put it. Native Americans, as you say in the USA. So it's not my issue. It's not my fight. It's not my area of expertise. I'm disclaiming here, I'm not an expert. But if you give this video 5 minutes, you might decide that actually I have a unique voice that's worth listening to for all of 5 minutes. Stick with me here. One of my fellow vegans, Vegan Gains, made a video recently harshly castigating and denouncing Black Lives Matter, primarily because of their use of violence.
And they beating up every white person. They jumping every white person. Man, no white person come down Sherman. He white. Beat his shit, bitch! Take him out his car!
Secondarily, because of some really extreme statements that their own leaders have made.
So there's a Black Lives Matter founder tweeting about how she just really wants to fucking kill white people, but particularly white men. This isn't just an isolated incident. Many members of Black Lives Matter have made violent, racist statements on social media, and some of them have even been prosecuted.
It's open season on killing white people and cops. It's unavoidable.
So leaders in the movement, in Black Lives Matter as an organization, again, it's not about a concept, this is about a real organization that has employees, that writes people paychecks, that has a budget, and apparently George Soros and a number of other donors have provided them with more than 100 million US dollars. That's reported in many ostensibly respectable publications, so I choose to believe that's a real number. We don't know. What's the problem with Black Lives Matter? It's very easy to say what Vegan Gains says. It is very easy to take specific, over-the-top statements by their leaders, by their followers, by criminals who murdered people and claim to be connected to Black Lives Matter, but the murders aren't specifically endorsed by Black Lives Matter.
These two men, Frederick Young and Philando Hunter, were sentenced on this day to life in prison without parole for robbing, torturing, murdering the two teens. Yet when Young had his chance to apologize to the families, he did nothing of the sort.
I'd like to say sorry to the families of Ayanna Jones, Michael Brown, Eric Gardner, and I want to apologize to them for not being able to get justice for their loved ones who was murdered in cold blood. And in respect for the peaceful protest, I want to say hands up, don't shoot, Black Lives Matter.
It's very easy to take this constellation of isolated points of light and say, this is Black Lives Matter. This is the problem. But on the other side, it's very easy for people to dismiss those claims and say, no, those are just a few bad apples. Excuses like that can go on for decades, they can go on for centuries. The whole history of communism, the whole history of socialism is composed of people who are willing and eager to tell you that even if Stalin killed millions of people, even if Lenin killed millions of people, few bad apples, few exceptions to the rule. These are just a few points of light, and don't draw any lines connecting them. No. Let's keep it all vague. Let's pretend that we're just talking about isolated individuals and that we can't judge what the organization is really about, what the ideology is really about. We can't come to any firm conclusions on the basis of what these people are saying in isolation. Okay, so the left wing especially has a problem with that. Let's just acknowledge anyone who comes out of a background in communism or socialism, they are used to making excuses of that, exactly that kind. How do we judge Black Lives Matter? How should we judge them as an organization? And conversely, how should the organization define itself as something that is to some extent different from and to some extent connected to those individual points of light? The answer is dirt simple, people. Whether you call it a constitution or a guiding principles document, every organization, every political party, even the boring old Liberal Party of Canada, the Conservative Party, you need to have a document that defines what your party is and what your party isn't. The negative definition, the definition of what your political movement excludes, is always more important than the positive definition of what you're trying to accomplish. I would defy you right now, look up the Constitution of the Liberal Party of Canada. You know what you're going to find? There's almost no positive definition in there. What is liberalism? Couldn't we all just sit down and write an essay right now about the answer? What is liberalism? What is the philosophy of the Liberal Party of Canada? You are not going to find that in the Constitution of the Liberal Party of Canada. But you're going to find a number of negative statements, basically like they're against racism, they're against homophobia, they completely exclude homophobia. So anyone who comes into their party and wants to run for office, let's say they get a conservative Christian preacher who's going to run for office. If he starts making statements against homophobia, he gets kicked out of the party. That's significant, right? These are the hard limits to what the party will and will not represent, what methods they will and will not use. If you're starting a vegan organization, I implore you, you have to explicitly say what is your position on violence and nonviolence in protest and otherwise. Otherwise, when someone in your group says something violent or does something violent, how do you define yourself as an organization as something separate from and yet linked to the individuals who call themselves your followers, who call themselves your leaders, the people who are maybe out there in the street chanting slogans, the people who may be out there in the street committing real crimes in your name, and who may be asking for your money, your $100 million from George Soros, your support, okay? Black Lives Matter. They do have a constitution. They have their so-called document of guiding principles. Here's the problem, folks. It's vague as hell. It utterly fails to either communicate the road to the future they want. It totally fails to describe specific legal changes, a vision of the future they're trying to accomplish, and it also fails to tell you what it is they exclude. It has some positive-sounding, vague titles like restorative justice, black villages, and loving engagement. Okay? The problem with these things... So, look, sounds great. Restorative justice, loving engagement, empathy. You can read this, okay, so these are the headings, section by section in their constitution. And then you can look at the news footage of people literally shouting for murder on the streets, literally chanting that they want to kill cops in the streets. And you say, no, these people, they can't possibly represent the core principles of Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter is about empathy, loving engagement, and restorative justice, right? So let's actually read what it says. Empathy. Quote, we are committed to practicing empathy. We engage comrades with the intent to learn about and connect with their context. Close quote. What does that mean? Does that express to you a positive vision of what the future should be, the road ahead, how they're going to get there, the methods they are going to use, or does it express to you negatively what they're not going to do, the lines they won't cross, what they refuse to do? Does it express to you something firm enough that you could say to one of their leaders when they make a tweet or they make a statement on Facebook or they give a lecture on a microphone, when they say something racist and pro-violence, something extreme, you say, no, you're crossing the line because in our Constitution it says we're an organization that's about empathy.
It's open season on killing white people and cops.
Pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon.
Okay? Rules need to have clear lines of demarcation. Okay? Rules need to have teeth. Rules need to have consequences. You have to know when you're breaking the rule, and you have to know what the consequences are going to be for breaking it. Like, you get kicked out of the Liberal Party. Like, you get kicked out of Black Lives Matter, or they disavow what you've said because it's clearly in contradiction to their Constitution. The problem is this Constitution is so vague, nothing contradiction, and you'll never be able to figure out what it is they're really trying to say. Loving engagement, quote, we are committed to embodying and practicing justice, liberation, and peace in our engagements with others. Watch the news footage. Look at the lists of statements from their leaders. What does that really mean? How are they going to accomplish it? Restorative justice, quote, we are committed to collectively, lovingly, and courageously working vigorously for freedom and justice for black people. Freedom and justice. And, by extension, all people. As we forge our path, we intentionally build and nurture a beloved community that is bonded together through a beautiful struggle that is restorative, not depleting. Restorative, not depleting. You tell me what that statement means. Does it mean that riots and murder are not okay? What is restorative and not depleting? The only thing in that statement that makes any sense was talking about building a community. What does that mean? Let's look up the section on community. Okay, so if you donate money to these people, what are they going to do with it? They're going to build a community. That's the only thing I know so far. They're also committed to empathy, but we read that part of the Constitution and we couldn't figure out what the hell that meant. Okay, going to build a community. So now we click on Black Villages. Let's find out about the community. Quote, we are committed to disrupting the Western prescribed nuclear family by supporting each other as extended families and villages that collectively care for one another and especially our children to the degree that mothers, parents, and children are comfortable. You interpret this for me, people. What the hell does that mean? If you donate money to Black Lives Matter, are they going to open a bunch of shelters? Are they going to open daycare centers? They're going to disrupt the Western family? How are you going to disrupt the Western nuclear family? How? How are you going to replace it with collective care for one another in villages? Do you mean you're actually going to build villages with wood, with bricks, with mortar? Are you going to build daycare centers? You got a budget apparently of over $100 million. You could open some daycare centers. Wouldn't hurt. Is that what Black Lives Matter is about? Are you exclusively about that and you're not about threatening to kill cops in the streets? What? Reading every word of this set of guiding principles, Black Lives Matter completely fails to communicate to you either positively what it is they're trying to accomplish or negatively what means and what methods they refuse to employ. And that second category is crucial. It's crucially important, people. It's so important. Even if you're a vegan organization, even if you're a Buddhist organization, you've got to put down in your constitution, what is your position on racism? Do you exclude racists? What is your position on, violent protests? What is your position on, think through every argument you don't want to have. You don't want to divide the organization internally. What is your position on abortion? What is your position on Israel? I know it sounds ridiculous, but the Green Party of Canada just tore itself apart. Nobody cares what the Green Party of Canada says about Israel. But because they didn't have a constitutional statement on that, they tore themselves apart debating what the Green Party of Canada's position on Israeli foreign policy, Israeli settlements, Israeli peace treaties should be. Right? Nobody's listening, but they're accusing each other over it. All those issues you got to sit down in writing in the Constitution. And then they become in some ways a barrier to entry, or they set up a clear line where when someone in your organization says something that's way over the line, someone in your organization says something racist, violent, offensive, something that discredits you, you can say, hey, what they said does not represent us, does not represent what our organization is about. And if you don't believe me, just read the Constitution. That's the end of this video. I'm just going to say about myself, I promised to at the beginning, my background. I said on Twitter recently, most of these people on YouTube never talk about their real life work experience and how it biases them in politics. But at the same time, they reproach me for talking openly about mine. So again, I'm just quoting myself off of Twitter here. When I talk about Cambodia, the Cree, etc., I'm not boasting. I'm telling you clearly, this is the bias that I bring to vegan politics, okay? I don't have experience organizing in Chicago, organizing disgruntled African-American youth. I have no experience of that kind. I don't have experience doing prison activism in the United States with black Americans who feel they've been wrongly convicted or if they've experienced police brutality. But I have no experience of that kind. The reason why so many of my videos mention I've done humanitarian work in Laos, I've done research linked to humanitarian work in Cambodia, I have this really strange background linked to Korean Ojibwe and First Nations. I'm not boasting. I'm telling you again and again, down to the level of the fact that I used to work in a Starbucks, the fact that I used to work behind the counter of a grocery store. I'm telling you, this is my life experience, this is my work experience, and it does bias me. It also motivates me. It gives me passion. I hope you can feel the passion coming across the camera right now. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in something I'm not. But I am going to say to you, hey, I have a different perspective. I can come here on YouTube and use up 13 minutes of your time and try to share that perspective with you. Maybe you can learn something from it. Maybe we can learn something from each other. And you know what? The damn shame of the thing is, an organization like Black Lives Matter, they have the opportunity of the decade to make a positive difference in the world. And I hope they take it. I hope they turn things around. I hope they sit down and look at their own constitution and realize that they need a constitution that actually constitutes something. They need guiding principles that will actually give them guidance. They need definitions that positively state what is the future they want to achieve, what is the road they're going to take to get there. And most importantly of all, they need to clearly say what methods they exclude. And I hope they will unambiguously commit to excluding violence. Because as Vegan Gains himself says, if you don't commit to nonviolent methods, then you do sooner or later slide down the slippery slope into terrorism.
They use fear, intimidation, and violence to push their political agenda, which is the definition of terrorism.
Guys, I hope you turn it around.
À-bas-le-ciel.